With technology, we have all these products that basically capture our attention and then sell that attention to the highest bidder. That kind of choice architecture could be considered kind of extractive.
Every app, every feed, every ad you've ever seen, there's a system behind all of it, and it's not designed for you.
AI is going to be better at knowing what my attention is worth and who to sell that to and those choices. The other thing that we can do with technology, especially with AI, with all this context we have about ourselves, is curate the choices that are around us that are best for us.
Brandon Marshall, a two-time founder, made Forbes 30 Under 30, spent 6 years building fund infrastructure for GPs and LPs, now leads fund strategy at StartX, Stanford's nonprofit accelerator, a Kaufman Fellow and Stanford MBA, and he spent 15 years learning one thing the hard way.
Talking to other founders is like mountain climbers talking to other mountain climbers. And they have this term called beta, which is effectively sharing notes. That is your strength. That is the superpower that everyone has, and trusting that.
But before the philosophy came the failures.
We were darlings at one point with these investors of what we were doing. It ultimately proved that the market was not big enough.
His second company had everything lined up: a distribution partner, a launch date. Then Silicon Valley Bank collapsed.
A big part of the fire just got stomped out. I should have recalibrated to what this new fire looked like. Basically thrown out the old playbook.
So what made you start again, and how did you approach flow this time? In part 1, Brandon Marshall walked us through his Build the Fire framework, a 4-stage model for how founders should think about growing a company. It starts at pre-seed, where your only job is to kindle one flame. As Brandon put it,
when you light a match, you're trying to figure out if there's a fit, if you can actually build something here.
At the seed stage, the trap is distraction.
You can get very distracted to be, well, I can build 10 fires right now. The discipline that you want is to just keep focusing on that one thing, because that becomes your advantage.
At Series A, it's time to operationalize.
You know how it works. You know how you're serving your customers. You can start to operationalize, meaning you can start writing the instructions, the skills that traditionally have become job descriptions.
And at Series B+, only then do you pour gasoline.
As you get to enough scale, you can think about other complementary fires. But at that point, the existing fire, the foundational one, it's a well-run machine.
In part 2, we go deeper into founder identity, the AI era, and what Brandon calls your unique fingerprint. Let's get into it. I'm Jim. As a founder myself, I learned something about this journey. The best way to build a startup is not to read a menu, but to learn from your fellow founders' stories. Before we dive in, I have a small favor to ask from you. If you find value in conversations in this channel, please hit subscribe button and turn on notifications. It helps us keep the mission going. And this will be the only favor I will ever ask of you. Actually, I would love to learn about your fingerprint.
Yeah. Sure.
What is your journey, and that defines Brandon and Brandon's data models.
Yeah.
I know that you came to Stanford GSB to work on clean tech.
Yeah.
But pivoted after saying a talk from Mark Pincus.
Yes.
Tell us more.
I was really interested in energy, and this was a long time ago when Kleiner Perkins, so you had John Doerr, Ray Lane, Al Gore had joined this as well, talking about building basically clean tech. This idea that we need a new energy infrastructure. So I came to Stanford for business school, and then I was doing a dual degree with environmental science, this program called EIPER. And so it was super fascinating, very policy driven. I think it still is. It was very policy driven at the time. And so I was spending more time with politicians than I was used to or really wanted to. And then I saw this announcement for this thing called ETL, Entrepreneur Thought Leaders, where they have these talks I think it's at the engineering school. And so I showed up. It was standing room only. Well, I actually sat on the floor in the front. And it was Mark Pincus, who was just working on a company called Zynga, which was a hot company at the time. And Bing Gordon, who was another partner at Kleiner, but not focused on energy. He was at EA, the electronic gaming company, and then became an investor. And they were just going at it, in terms of, Mark is a very passionate entrepreneur. But this idea of just, shaping the future, having an idea for the future and the speed at which you could do that. And so I as a lot of us did, is I got the bug for startups. And I then became president of the entrepreneurship club at Stanford for the business school. And actually my first email as president there was to have classmates endorse this idea for SSE Labs and vote for SSE Labs, which was the start of StartX. So SSE Labs became StartX. So that's a lot of kind of the origin story of things, my connection to StartX and trying to help it in some way. And I took a class, electronic business, and I didn't know really anything about tech. Or again, this was just kind of, I was immersing in all this stuff. And they said, we need to bring, you need to bring for your class, the final project, technology to an antiquated industry. And so a lot of my philosophy is around human agency. It's around this concept of service. And so I thought restaurants would be really interesting to apply technology. And so the idea was, well, restaurants have a high failure rate. They have all this cost. What if we just brought the chef into the home? Right? We showcase the chef and their talents, and they'd have their restaurant online, and then they can come into the home. And people love the idea. And I worked on that. I was one of the first StartX companies to worked on it over the summer in a conference room on campus. One thing kind of led to the other. StartX was a big piece of that, of understanding how to navigate, how to build things as a founder. So I think community is really important there. Worked on it my entire second year at business school, which probably wasn't the best idea because I didn't really go socialize a lot then. I was just working all the time, but it was a lot of fun. And then, we worked on that for 5 years. In terms of all the lessons learned, I think a lot about talking to other founders is like mountain climbers talking to other mountain climbers. And they have this term called beta, which is effectively sharing notes. Like, hey, I went up this mountain. I want to tell you, like, here's what you need to do when you go up this mountain. So that's the beta. I felt like that was very organically happening with StartX in the community. It was very helpful for me.
I'm also curious that because you mentioned about SSE and also StartX. A lot of our audiences, we actually had a Pong Pong come to share in the previous episode.
Oh, wonderful. She's great.
Yeah. And so a lot of our audience got some level about the later part of StartX, where StartX now. I think you have a lot of insights about how the StartX became StartX. Can you share a little bit more about, I think it intertwined with your first business as well.
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean, we had so Cameron, the founder, he was the one that really spearheaded this. I mean, YC was really just getting started type thing. I mean, it's very early days. So SSE Labs became StartX. So that was kind of the spin out of the nonprofit. And so what was interesting is that the conversation at the time actually got in trouble when I was at the GSB sending the email because they didn't want to have an accelerator. So that's the mindset, right? They didn't want another accelerator. They wanted students going to class. They didn't want them not going to class and coming up with a silly idea like pets.com. So Cameron and a lot of folks on campus, while still students, really figured out how to navigate that, like some of the politics, but find the evangelists and supporters. And Hennessy, who was the president at the time, was a huge supporter and really saw this as like, wow, we have these amazing entrepreneurs that have gone to Stanford. This makes total sense. Let's build a community and process for this. And so, I would say I had a limited role with the entrepreneurship club and support and some evangelists. My main involvement was, I think, being the guinea pig of one of the first companies. So Kitchit was the company for the chef business. But I think it's a nonprofit today. And I think what was very unique about the story from the initial period was how do you build a founder community based on trust to navigate this journey? How do you protect founders from people who have other incentives, right? So of all different sorts that are not focused on this very delicate process of how do you become a founder and how do you build a business? And I think that's something I'm very proud of what exists today in the StartX community. And that started in the ethos in those really early days. And just always having a phone, always having somebody you could call was really cool and really powerful. So that's, and then it went out in terms of the early days, we got space in the old AOL building, or it was an AOL building. And they gave us some space, which was a lot of fun. It was very, very different, right? It was a different era that AOL was doing its thing, and it's still stuck in that era. And so it was interesting to go and build these new companies there.
Cool. I like your metaphor of like mountain climber to mountain climber conversation. That's also exactly the feeling I'm having when I build a founder community.
Yeah.
It's like founder naturally want to share notes. It's like a mountain climber, and you climb it, you have to spend so much effort to figure out all these passes and go to the mountain top. And you're the only person who knows this.
Yeah.
And you actually are very eager to share with other people.
Yes. I think that's in the culture. I mean, even for example, when you were asking me about the growth phase, I really haven't been up that mountain, right? In terms of going to thousands of employees. And so I was like, okay, well, let's talk about the ones that I had been up, right? In terms of building a company and working really where I can provide insights in this, the fire metaphor. Those are distilling the things that I've learned. And so I think the tradition and the beta thing of that term, I just recently learned about because I was talking to a mountain climber. I said, oh, that's beta.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so sharing the beta, I think is really, it's part of the tradition of being a founder and being in the community that you're building, and the excitement of being here today in some respect to try to help share some of that it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
It's fun. Another metaphor I had was it's like the great discovery period in which that everyone is trying to find the route to India. Yeah. And then there's all these sellers, and on the one hand, they're all like selling and finding their own paths, but they all share these learnings. Yeah. They have their long share. So together they actually map out the world. Yes. That is the biggest discovery.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Related to that, I also want to share chat about you mentioned about you started the Kitchit. So it started with ideas of allowing people to find a private chef very easily. Yeah. I think that during this startup journey, you have experienced very unusual incidents.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell us more about.
When you start something and you're trying to build a company, you get a lot of surprises, right? It is a roller coaster. This was a very tragic surprise. So, we had this amazing year. This was Kitchit in the early days. The plan was in the first week of January, because timing when you go to fundraising is important. I had all these meetings lined up on Sand Hill Road, meeting with all the big investors. And so kind of everything was lined up. And I get this call that George, who's one of my co-founders, a brilliant person I met at Stanford, engineer, and just lovely human, was in the ICU because he got hit by a car. It didn't look like he was going to make it. And so all of a sudden kind of the music stopped, right? You're kind of in this free fall of not knowing what to do. And so there's this process that I went through where the team is looking at me on stuff. Investors are looking at me at stuff. And then there's the personal of I'm losing a very close friend and somebody who I've been working very closely with. And now they're just gone. I'd say it was the first time where I called mentors. Remember the phone thing? And people said, I don't really have good advice for you here. Like, let us know how to be helpful, right? Type thing. We're here to support you in some way. But I really felt kind of on my own in how to navigate it. And then there were people asking like what we should do next. I think from a leadership perspective, it really was clear to me that my job was not to have all of the answers. My job was to help create the environment to find those answers and to navigate towards those answers, and support the team with that environment, and to ask the questions, but hold the space for that, to figure out what we were supposed to do next. when he became, I'll tell a quick story about him. So I met him with Basis, had an event. We went into the Dutch Goose, which is this place off campus. And he was very skeptical of any non-engineer, certainly skeptical of somebody from the GSB or an MBA person, right? Because they're usually just not fun to be around on startup stuff. And we hit it off. We got along very quickly. A very curious person. We played a round of fierce competitive ping pong as we negotiated how much founder equity he was going to have at the house. And he rode home that night down University Avenue on his bike, and he was screaming of excitement, and he got pulled over by a police officer thinking he was drunk. And he says, "No, I'm not drunk. I'm just really excited. I'm starting a company." And the police officer was like, "Only here at Stanford would I hear that something like that." Okay, yes, nobody's going to make up that story. So it was just like he was just this very energized person, this amazing human. And then there's this tremendous loss. It was really hard. He was an only child. He was from China, and he had these incredible parents. And he was just off the charts from an intelligence perspective, and kind of the pride and joy. And so there was that when the family came, and how do we honor that? And there was a lot of components that we could talk about, but I'd say from, and I've had, unfortunately, other founders have experienced this as well. And so people reach out, and the thing I always go to is your job is not to have all these answers, is to create the environment for the process of finding those answers. I think that's been the most helpful. And then, the other stuff is just really, really harsh.
I think what you mentioned about, I think it's still very useful to all of us, is that a lot of times it's okay to not have answers. That's also part of leadership. As long as we find the environment or create an environment that the whole team can connectively finding out answers for that.
I hadn't actually connected that as clearly as you just did with the importance. When I talk about there is no test, you're navigating an unknown. You're in a frontier in some respect. And so the process of how you navigate the unknown, I think, is a really important leadership trait, especially for founders.
So I'm also curious about, because you mentioned about you spent 5 years in this startup, what is the main takeaway you got from Kitchit?
There's a lot of beta from that. We had a product that served a market in terms of, let's talk about the fire piece, where I still have, this is now 10 years later, people come up to me and tell me their amazing Kitchit stories. And we had a net promoter score of 92.
Wow.
Over 100,000 people had done a Kitchit, were in different markets. People loved the product. Chefs loved it. They were building their own business. They were entrepreneurs. They could do whatever they wanted to express kind of their art form. It was also, when I talk about service, this concept of kind of happiness and joy as a principle. It's this virtuous cycle of creating this happiness for others creates joy for yourself. And that joy keeps building and building and building as you bring more and more happiness to others. So I was from a mission alignment, the founder market fit, and the impact that we were having, I felt great and successful. I did not connect it to the right source of capital. Right. We went and tried to raise venture capital. We did raise venture capital. We raised a lot of money. And I was not building a disciplined fire. I was bringing in a lot of fuel. I was having access to fuel. We were darlings at one point with these investors of what we were doing. And so we had access to all this capital. And, it ultimately proved that the market was not big enough. Hindsight, yes, that makes sense. The private chef market to bring chefs into the home probably is not going to be $100 billion company. But I didn't really appreciate it at the time. And so I think one of the big things was just really aligning, again, making sure that there's founder market fit in what I was building, but also making sure that if I bring in capital with those types of investors, venture capital investors, I'm also very confident that there's a market for what I'm trying to build that's large enough. And so if I do succeed in building this tremendous value for customers, I'm also matching that with how I'm delivering that value, not just through the product, but also the capital and the revenue, the business model.
A lot of times, like building a business is like an art. Always cook, like it's very like a chef who cooks different ingredients.
Sure.
Put a little bit of salt, put a little bit of pepper, everything putting together, and the founders need to find the right balance.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned that the market size is match the type of capital, and eventually that will be a healthy dynamics.
Yeah. And that's a lot of investors will talk about, you need this huge market because it's okay. If we figure out this other piece where it's great and we have a huge market, then we have a winner, in terms of what the venture investors need. And if it's alignment with who you are, then you have a winner in terms of like, you've built this great business over a decade and it was worth building. So matching those different elements and the incentives that people have is really critical.
And after Kitchit, I think your internal fire of being entrepreneur has not ended yet. So you started Flow. Flow came after Kitchit.
Yeah.
So what made you start again? And how did you approach Flow this time?
Yeah, I tried to approach it really with, so first I started working with this guy, Adrian, who came on as CTO when we were trying to recover from George's passing and loss. And so Adrian and I really enjoyed working together. He's this fantastic engineer, kind of a builder of builders. So he'd build hardware to software, everything not everything in between, that's kind of everything. But he'd build a lot of different things. So we wanted to build something together. We're excited about working together. And we were in the middle of, and working in startups and with investors. We were around a lot of the investments that were taking place. And so there was an opportunity to go and invest into SpaceX. And this is back in 2017. Wow. So that was cool.
Wow.
But the way that we invested into that was very archaic, right? Everyone's now seemingly familiar with SPVs.
Yeah, So right? You were doing SPV back then?
So we did it. We were putting together this SPV for going and buying these shares. It was just a very fragmented, antiquated process, right? How to work with investors, the legal paperwork, and the answers that were existing in the market. The angel list didn't really make a lot of sense at the time for what we were trying to do, because it was a more institutional, I guess you could say, in terms of who we were working with. And so we built our own solution, kind of a prototype. And that led to people liking the product. So we kind of we're trying to solve our own problem in that sense. And then people liked it, and we're starting to get pulled by the market of like, hey, build this. And where we got excited about, okay, why is this important to us, is we thought about it. I was like, well, if you think about the private markets, you have all this money, capital, all these investors' money going into these vehicles, sometimes SPVs, largely funds that have a thesis for like, what the future is going to look like. And so they're going to go invest in those companies. And so that is a big workflow. That is a big network that you have LPs or investors, the GPs, the funds, and these companies all getting together to try to basically build the future. So if we unlock that in some way with Flow, right, if we make that more streamlined across this network, we're going to accelerate what the future looks like. We're going to accelerate innovation. And rooted in that is we're going to accelerate the ability for founders to realize businesses, right? So it's this kind of empowering way of thinking about what we can do in the private markets. And so that was the basis of the idea. That's how we started. And we did that for about 5 years, and then sold that last year. It's the Cliff Notes version. There's a lot that happened in those 5 years.
So you build on this initial insight by solving your own problem, like building an SPV for investing in SpaceX. And so at the end, you build a solution that is helping founders to creating these vehicles and making the fundraising process streamlined from that.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, as you are doing this searching process we talked about earlier, what are the most memorable moments you had? Like made you feel like, I'm building some real thing, like someone lost to use it?
Well, so this was not the only thing we were working on. Mm-hmm. We basically had a rubric that we would go and look at different ideas. We would talk to a lot of people, figure out kind of what they're working on and the problems that were solved. We'd do our own kind of soul searching of what we got excited about. Mm-hmm. So it was probably, I'd say, about a dozen different threads where we're exploring stuff. And this took about a year of going around. We wanted to see, so this is, 2015 or so. We wanted to go to China as one thing, because we were hearing a lot about 996. We were hearing a lot about startup culture and like entrepreneurs and what was happening with tech. And we're like, cool, we've been so heads down for the last 5 years. Let's go check it out. And that was super cool. And I really, the founder mindset there and just how entrepreneurs, so many cool things happen there. So we cast a wide net with a very focused rubric of how we're vetting ideas, wanting to find validated signal and wanting to find something that we were genuinely excited about building, right? So that initial founder market fit and initial validation for the market. So we were starting a little different experiments and fires. The aha moment is when we did this, we had like 20 some odd investors into this SPV for SpaceX. And everyone was like, I want that. Not like, oh, this would be cool. That was cool. Like, I want this. I'm doing this. I'm doing these all the time. This is so much better. I was like, we built this over the weekend. Okay. So there was, unlike these other projects where like, oh, this could be kind of cool. We had hardware ideas like build your own, kind of like a writing iPad so you can go in the park and write. I mean, like bad ideas. And then we had some other good ones. This one where we're like, it was a very clear pull. And we talked to 100 people. It was like, everyone has this problem. It doesn't matter if it's the small SPVs to the largest institutional investors. We went to New York and Chicago, like everywhere, everyone had this huge headache. So that's where all the signals were there.
And I think during the journey when you are building Flow, you are in the financial market, essentially. SVB Bank collapsed in March 2023. That seemed to create an overnight crisis for many founders, including you.
Yeah, I think it was, so we had, they were our big investor. They invested off balance sheet. They'd only done that a number of times, or a handful of times, because we were helping them solve a really important part of the private markets with our infrastructure for Flow. A big component of our strategy was to leverage the go-to-market. So how do we go to market? The sales cycle for enterprise or all this B2B stuff, it can be grueling and very expensive. And so the thesis was that we'd have this tremendous distribution partner for Flow, and they were going to train their sales force to help do so. And it was great. They're great to work with. And then everything, I think that was planned. Well, I know that was planned for, I think it was April 1st or that first week of April, and starting in Q2. And I think they went down in March, something, right? So we're a couple of weeks away from our go-to-market plan starting to roll out. A big mistake that I made there was not, if you think about the fire aspect, like a big part of the fire just got stomped out. I should have recalibrated to what this new fire looked like. Basically thrown out the old playbook, said, this is where we're at now, right-size the business, the hard decision there, for making sure that the level of product and the investment we're making as a team was matched to our sales motion, our go-to-market of how we could actually grow the business and how much we knew about that sales motion and what we could do. And we really tried, I really made the decision to try to force that and not slow down the rest of the fire, so to speak, and build a go-to-market function that we had spent years doing to try to do that in a couple months. So that put a lot of interesting pressure on the business. We had, as a result, built this tremendous product that was institutional grade, which drove the sale of our business. And I think that made everyone happy. But I think the frustration, kind of like the beta there, where I should have right-sized and gone back to like first principles, like, no, okay, that world no longer exists. I have to pivot away from that, recalibrate, and then deal with this new reality and then build from there. So that was a big insight that I had from the SVB experience. The other thing to make a point of, we've been talking about beta and the founder community, finding peers and other founders to help sanity check and stress test assumptions of what you're doing is almost your kind of independent board. Yeah, I call it the mini board that you have.
Yeah.
And so you have these people who can help, everyone has an incentive structure, right? The members of your board, the employees, investors, in the company more broadly, the market, everyone has an opinion, right? And so I think as you gather them and try to incorporate that into your thinking, just having that independent group who can act as peers, who ideally have been up those mountains that you're trying to solve and go up, I think is really valuable to have. And so I think I had listened, or certain things I didn't quite incorporate enough to make the right size decision to recalibrate on the plan. But I think when I look at the StartX community or the founder community, that my kind of mini board that I go to, it was pretty clear that that's what I should have done. Everyone's busy working on a lot of stuff. And so there can be a randomness to picking up the phone and talking to folks. And time passes, or the context, there's kind of what is the catalyst? And so I don't think it's best to wait until you're calling because there's a big fire and you can't put it out, right? The wrong kind of fire. So I just started doing a lot of quarterly check-ins with friends and people in my network that we just put stuff on the calendar. And that grew into kind of a mini board. Some of them are one-on-ones and some of them are groups. I think the ideal thing is that there's some level, it's not too formal. I think you're getting a recurring meeting on, and there's some agenda that you want some level of a feedback loop of how you're building the conversation, some level of expectations, what you're bringing to the conversation. But I find that the biggest value in how to think about the board is try to find the peers where you can push each other in an authentic way. And then you're basically just trying to create a space where you're spending some time together, whether digitally or in person, on a routine or some kind of cadence, because that space otherwise kind of disappears. Right. You're working 7 days a week, like you don't think about it. So that I think it's pretty simple. It's just starting. It's creating we should have a mini board, right, and check in once a quarter on stuff. I mean, we kind of do that anyways. So I think there's a tradition around it, and I wouldn't overthink it. I just do it and learn from it and see if it's worthwhile or not. I just want to emphasize the psychology is really challenging. If you don't, of being a founder and building something, if you don't have a peer network, because you are interacting with customers or employees or investors who are not having the same experience. And so you can really, if you suffer in silence, or if you ruminate in silence, you can't learn as much, and you can't express as much, because these other stakeholders, you have a relationship where you can't share the information in the same way, or they can't appreciate that. It's just a different language. Right. So having that small group and the stuff that we would have through StartX, and I always enjoy doing it because it's a lot of fun, but I also think what I think is really important for that is it clicks to be like, oh, this isn't a waste of time to randomly meet, and, go hike the dish or something with a group, whatever it is, that like, oh, this is, I can, there's a different thought process happening. And that peer network and shared journey, I think, is really important. As we all are thinking about the implications of AI, and experimenting with it, one aspect was my approach of just saying, well, it's the fingerprint, what is unique to me, and how do I create leverage and do that? That's one component. The other is to say, okay, well, how is the world going to look different? And then, like, how do we build our sense of world in the first place? So what I mean by that, we talked about stories at the beginning. Yeah. So we live in stories. There's a narrative that we're participating in. And so we're talking about the founder story. We could talk about, the Silicon Valley story, the kind of all these kind of characters that we find ourselves playing, like the roles that we have within these stories, being an American or whatever, country people are part of. So with technology, we have all these products that basically capture our attention and then sell that attention to the highest bidder. And when they're doing so, they are understanding a lot about what our narrative is, or who we want to be, or who we think we are. And what they are doing when they're selling that attention is they're selling choices. So if I want to get a black sweater, and I search for that, or I might see an ad for that, it might be J. Crew or some big company that has spent a lot of money to buy my attention. And so in thinking about that, I said, okay, well, that's going to accelerate. AI is going to be better at knowing kind of what my attention is worth and who to sell that to, and those choices. And that kind of choice architecture could be considered kind of extractive. It's just a model of how things work, how the business works. The other thing that we can do with technology, especially with AI, with all this context we have about ourselves, is curate the choices that are around us that are best for us. So this concept of human agency, how do I make the best decision for myself, which is going to be different than the best decision for you. And this is getting to that sense of like basically this concept of coherence. So a lot of times we see when the products that capture our attention and they're selling to the highest bidder, they're thinking in terms of how do they extract as much value from that one transaction, right? How do they sell me the most expensive sweater, or how do they sell us how do they make the most off of that attention that they're selling? If instead it was, I know everything about Brendan, I know what's already in his wardrobe or how many sweaters he has, I know his personal style, his budget, kind of how he wants to use these sweaters, I can build a technology that'll curate, these are the best sweaters for him specifically. And that creates this whole exposure to a long tail of products and choices that I didn't have access to before. Because the system, instead of going and just selling to the highest bidder, is actually very focused on what is the best choice that Brendan can make in this particular moment. So we're talking about things, so talking about buying a product. And then how do I source that choice to in some part of the world where that choice might be available? So how do I build resonance with the choice architecture? And so that's the concept of this coherence. And so as a version of that, it might introduce me to some boutique sweater maker in some other remote part of the world that is selling a sweater for that. And instead of them having to buy my attention for it, they're getting pulled into this market for it. And it's almost like a traditional wholesale retail model. So instead of me going into a big shopping mall and like walking into I'm picking on J. Crew, but there's other ones, right? So if I go to the Stanford shopping mall and I walk into J. Crew and it has the sweater, like that's my choice. It's a shopping mall or it's a store that's curated specifically for me. And there's a business model that you can build around, let's call it the wholesale retail model, there's an economic incentive to build that store. So that's what I talk about, this technology that can optimize choices available to us that would increase our human agency and help us make better choices about how we're living our lives. And that would apply not just to things, it would also apply to relationships. So our personal relationships, our professional relationships, what is the cohesion or coherence that we're having? What are the dynamics? It could be just with our individual self and how we want to self-actualize on some level. How do we want to improve ourselves? So I think the idea of this concept of a coherence economy, this idea of focusing on human agency, is that as we build data models and structure of our fingerprint, and we build systems that can take all of that context, it can start to curate what are the best choices, what are the best narratives that are going to be best for that fingerprint, best for that human. And that's the idea.
The key concept here is the coherence economy, which is like the new type of economy that is different than what we have right now. What we are right now is really some sort of marketing economy in which we have goods and we sell to the highest bidder. And because of that, everyone basically are normalized to basically like the market is producing whatever that has highest profits. And everyone just consume whatever is available on the market. That's the examples you have the Stanford shopping mall. It's like the production side, they will basically produce whatever that makes the highest profit. And they will make it available on the shop. And then when we buy the clothes, we just go to the shop and say whatever is available in the shop. And as a consequence of that, it actually limits the choice. And so we are kind of in a space where choice is limited. What I hear you say is that because of the AI, these data models, it is possible that we build a thing that really tailors to the uniqueness of each person. So like the early thing you mentioned about uniqueness is not just applicable to founders, but every individual consumers as well. So we have this capability that is creating unique experience for every consumer that widen the choice of everyone. And also, when people realize that they can get something that deeply personalized them, they wouldn't choose whatever on the market. So that changes this choice architecture. And also in the end, it will unleash human agency.
Yes, I think if we have time, I'd like to just do a recap to make it a little more clear. So in terms of how, that's exactly right. But what I mean by coherence is this idea of, which could be physiological, like you could feel good.
Yeah.
You could be healthier. There's if I do something today, if I make a decision, I make decisions, we make a bunch of choices throughout the day. How does that impact my well-being? And then how do we actually quantify what does well-being mean? Do I feel well? Am I thinking clearly? So another example would simply be, we set an alarm clock, 7 a.m., whatever you're setting an alarm off. And it goes off when the clock wants to go off. And then I have my meeting scheduled for what I need to do the day, and the emails happen and all of that. You can have a device, let's say your Oura Ring or whatnot, that understands where you're at in your sleep cycle. And the alarm gets calibrated to bring you out of, to bring you awake when it knows that you've exited REM and that you're actually in the ideal time to just be brought to being awake. And it could be 7:05 or it could be a certain time, but it's optimized for you. That is looking at kind of your energy levels and saying, okay, we're going to curate your schedule, or we're going to go to the gym and we're going to figure out what is the optimal workout that you can have for where you're at physiologically. So when I'm talking about coherence, I'm talking about all of this customization of the choices and decisions that we make constantly, and the structure and plans that we have constantly, to have them oriented towards optimization of some version of coherence, which is just a measurable state that we might have.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because you mentioned about this is trend is enabled by technology, in particular by AI. How do you think that AI is enabling this right now? So it can connect all these data. It can take my fingerprint and all the history and all of my information, and that is the context. It's no longer, okay, we both live in San Francisco and we fit a similar profile. Like we're male of this age and this is our occupation, and that attention is worth X to somebody. It's much more about like who I actually am. What am I trying to achieve? That context, we can connect all those data sources like we haven't been able to do. And I think that enables us to either optimize the extraction of choice, so we can accelerate a lot of the existing models, or we can actually increase our choice or the quality of choices that we make. I think it's a better way of thinking about it, towards our own kind of self-interest, which I'm trying to define as coherence. Gotcha. Yeah. Another question I have related is that a lot of people are saying 2026 is the year of personal agent. Like all of us will have a personal agent, could be OpenClaw, could be cloud coworker or anything like that. Do you think this, what you mentioned about coherence economy and this personal agent trend is connected or not?
I think that human agency is going to be a very major theme of, how do we make decisions, and how does this technology influence our decisions and how we spend our time? So I think that's happening very, very, very much in real time today. I think the personal agent aspect and how people are experimenting with it, it is remarkable every time I travel outside of the bubble that we are in, where it feels like I feel like I'm going back a decade, in terms of what's happening and today, and with all the technology out. And then I look at the timeline of when did CoWork come out? When did OpenClaw come out? I mean, we're talking weeks, right? In terms of the cycles that we're on.
This episode we're recording like March. The CoWork is just like a few weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and that feels like old hat. Like I have, so I think my orientation on this again is the unique elements of who we are, which is directly tied to how I want to be helping founders and almost helping produce that in some way. In the process of that self-discovery, the process of bringing that value to a market, the process of building that value in a market. So I think that's not just for founders anymore. I think these personal agents are really important to incorporate into your life to figure that out for yourself, even outside of building a company.
Cool. I think for the last part of the conversation, I actually want to step back. Like, you have this incredible journey of yourself, being an entrepreneur, exploring different journeys from Hollywood to Stanford, building all startups, then became a journey. Now it's coaching and helping a lot of founders like me. And if you step back and telling your version of Brandon in 2009, what would be the conversation you would have? What advice would you have?
It's an adventure. It really is. I think the people that you'll meet, the community aspect is really second to none. I really appreciate the people that I share this journey with. I think I've talked a lot about the authenticity piece of really just, that is your strength. That is the superpower that everyone has, and trusting that. And just embracing the learning curve on all of these things. Like that is people will talk about the journey or destination. The destination is very important because it orients the journey. Right.
Yes.
You want to be thoughtful on the mountains that you're going up.
Yes.
Really be thoughtful about the people you're going up with. And yes, you're going to be spending the majority of time on that journey, but the orientation of that journey, I think, is really important. So I think my advice is really a lot of what we were talking about today with the beta aspect, but it's rooted in how do you be your authentic self? That is your competitive advantage. And really being ruthless about trying to learn and grow, and finding a peer network, a community to grow with, I think is one of the more invaluable pieces, not just for the process, the goals that you might have, but also for the outcome. Fast forward 15 years and 17 years, and you fast forward and I have this amazing group of people that are part of my life in this experience. Yeah. And so you get this tremendous reward outside of just the, kind of whatever success or trophies you get along the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your learning, your better to fellow founders.
Thank you for having me.
Actually, what you shared is so resonating to us as we build a founder cohort. Our slogan is share your story, fuel founder journey. It's exactly like you mentioned about, like, as we're mountain climbers, we went through our journey, we have learned and seen many sceneries, and we can share our betters to others. Yeah. It can fuel other people's journey. At the same time, it also fuel our journey and help us to know more people and enjoying the journey. It's like you mentioned, journey is equally important as the destination. Yeah, thank you very much, Brandon, to sharing with us your insights, and so much fun conversation as always. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching the full interview. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.